Hello uncanny people of YouTube, welcome to Uncanny Xplainers, a channel that looks at stories throughout comicdom that aim to provide context and understanding to those who haven't picked up an issue or touched a long box in their life, and hopefully some entertainment to those who are, used to it? Allow me to state my case for both sides of the aisle. Are you one of the many people affected by what does any of this crap mean when sitting down to watch a comic book movie with your friends? Or at least people you call friends? Well, hopefully this channel will help guide you through the overwhelming pressure of trying to understand these silly stories from these silly comics which have produced these silly movies, which then feeds into the creation of more silly comics, and now the serpent has consumed its own tail and the Ouroboros is complete. Eventually, with the help of the content I put out, you too will become that person that can reflexively correct someone when they have to explain how many Robins Batman has, or, I don't know, which one of these three red-headed women is this man's mother. Alright, you know-it-alls, you guys probably think, oh, I know all there is to about Superman when it comes to the DCU, or I know everything about the X-Men when it comes to the MCU. Well, think again, bucko. Are you gonna sit there with a straight face and explain to your friends that Superman once defeated one of the most powerful beings in the DC universe by whistling at them? Or more importantly, which one of these red-headed women is this person's mother? Yeah, that's right, it's all three. I'm sorry, that came out a lot more confrontational than I originally intended.
Get some help.
As an apology, I will dedicate an entire video to the most important character in Marvel Comics. And if you're somehow in neither of those camps, look, I got some spicy memes, and you'll learn how quickly explaining a story will deteriorate my sanity. Without further ado, let's enter the danger room.
Welcome, Professor.
Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the bedrock for modern X-Men stories. This is the story that made characters like Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and this guy into household names. This would be the team that would go on to illustrate the fact that mutants are an ostracized group that are often seen as terrorists and abominations by the larger portion of the Marvel landscape, and heroes by an even smaller portion. Anyways, let's try to break down this iconic and kinda silly comic. Our story starts off with our blue baby boy Kurt Wagner running away from a mob, presumably because he's... Oh, and he kinda looks like Satan, who kinda might be his dad. When the mob has Kurt cornered, the mob suddenly becomes stunlocked because they weren't spec for telepaths, and in walks... rolls in Charles Xavier, aka Professor X and mentor to the X-Men, who might secretly be a billionaire because not everybody has a fully functional stealth jet, mansion, and extensive training facility in upstate New York. Yeah, this paraplegic billionaire owns a stealth jet. Eat your heart out, Elon Musk. He quickly explains to Kurt that he's a mutant and that Xavier can provide a safe haven from constantly being hunted like he's the world's most prized Beanie Baby. Nah, that's Beast. Fine then, he's the most elusive member of the Blue Man group. No, that's Mystique, who's also his mom. Fine then, he's the Blue Portal from Portal. Are you happy now? Actually, that's Matt. After Germany, we then end up in Canada. While this is not explained in the story itself, this is supposed to be the base of Department H. Think of them as Canada's S.H.I.E.L.D., but they suck, and they got shut down. Professor X learns about Wolverine because of his most recent battle with the Hulk. Aww, Shorty's got whiskers. He quickly establishes that Wolverine is not only a mutant, but he has a job for him. He then offers Wolverine, already in his prepackaged costume, to become a free agent, which then gets General Chasen very angry. Chasen here states that Canada has spent a lot of time and money developing Wolverine, but that's Canadian money, so like Monopoly money, I guess? At which point Wolverine pops out just one claw to commit his first brutal act as an X-Men, cutting the General's tie off. Xavier then flies to Nashville, Tennessee to meet Sean Cassidy, aka Banshee. a mutant whose ability is acoustikinesis. Look, the man just yells and hears real good. What more do you want from me? And in literally 2 panels, Professor X manages to convince Banshee to join his team. Sorry, just gonna throw this out here real quick. This story takes place in and around the same time this comic was written, 1975. People had phones in 1975, Xavier. Hell, even a letter probably could have done. Clearly he wasn't doing anything pressing if Banshee was just chilling in a movie theater in Nashville, Tennessee. Alright, back to the video. We then cut to Kenya to meet one of my favorite members of the X-Men, Aurora Monroe, aka Storm. When we first meet Storm, she's held as a goddess. She's worshipped as much by the local tribe because she can bring rain to droughted lands. Because if Storm knows anything, it's how to deal with thirsty people. After making it rain, she flies around and uses real lightning! She eventually lands and inexplicably runs into Xavier, which means that she was either up in the air for a long time or Xavier is a speed demon in that wheelchair. He proceeds to tell her that she's a mutant, and maybe some of the most honest words Xavier has said in this comic, the world needs her and her powers, even though she'll become hated and ostracized for her powers and abilities. Storm eventually realizes it's time for her to leave the comforts of being a goddess to explore her mutant identity and help this well-meaning stranger. But if you ask me, this kind of sums up why Storm comes along.
That works. I just wanted to electrocute people.
Next up on the adventures of Where in the World is Professor X is Japan. He then has another 2-panel conversation, this time with a mutant named Shiro Yoshida, aka Sunfire, convincing him to join this haphazardly thrown together and yet radically diverse team. Like Wolverine, Sunfire also has a pre-packaged costume, except this time it has the Japanese rising sun on his chest. You know, the cool imperialistic symbol Japan used during World War II to commit various war crimes and atrocities. Like another symbol a certain country used during World War II, used to commit various war crimes and atrocities. Well, don't want to risk getting flagged by YouTube over a symbol made for idiots by idiots. Getting that whole mess out of the way, we now cut to Siberia, Russia, to run into the absolute unit and soft-spoken boy himself, Peter Rasputin, aka Colossus, who admittedly may be my most favorite X-Men member, but that's another topic for another time. We see Peter helping out on the family farm when suddenly a rogue tractor charging towards his sister, Ilyana Rasputin, who just happens to magically appear. To those of you who get that, you're welcome. To those of you who don't, in due time. All in due time. And without having to think about the secret he's kept from his family about his mutation, proceeds to armor up and stand in the way of the charging tractor to save his little sister, who seems to have been digging up dirt with a small pail? Is this what Russian kids did for fun back in the day? I mean, damn, at least I had Legos and action figures with lead paint in them, but that's just sad. His sister is ultimately saved without a scratch on her, but his secret is now out, and who should be there? You guessed it. Hot Wheels himself. Like mutants before him, he shows up to Peter asking him to join him for his mission. And in another wholesome moment, Peter asks his parents for permission to aid the professor, and they wholeheartedly support his decision to help him learn how to use his mutant powers. Okay, just real quick, I wanted to emphasize how rare that is in X-Men comics, or comics including mutants, that you have parents that are genuinely concerned with their children and want to find a way to help them use their powers and protect them the best way possible. It's believable stories like this we can begin to see how X-Men comics are sometimes analogs to people from different representations, and having them open up to what defines them to people who they trust, and then have that reciprocated by those same people in return. We will see that more than often the opposite of this happens in X-Men comics, which makes moments like those so much more conveying and brutal, while moments like these are so much more wholesome and special. Alright, back to the video. Going from Siberia, we cut to Arizona, where we find ourselves with John Proudstar, who's literally running to chase a bison and... Wait, did he just perform a wrestling move on this furry cow with horns?
You'll never hit an RKO on the beast!
We see that he has some minor internal thoughts about how he feels about his own people, which at best sounds like he's whining, and at worst comes off like he's looking down on his own people, who I feel like he should empathize with more, because it's not like Native Americans have had it easy since, I don't know, the moment European strangers walked up to them and exposed them to diseases they've never needed to cope with to begin with. It's up to you how you decipher that, but sounds shitty either way. Eventually, who should walk? I swear I'm not doing this on purpose. Rolls up to John in a full suit and tie in a wheelchair in the Arizona desert, and uses the same spiel for the past other 6 mutants to join his new team. From here we have John calling Charles a cripple, and in return Charles asks John if he can give pride back to your people, which is then followed by John calling Charles the white man, at which point Charles follows back and calls the Apache frightened selfish children. While I could chalk this up to 2 people just name calling each other and acting like entitled babies, it could also prove to show that not all mutants treat each other with respect just in a real ham-fisted way, but could also show that Charles kinda sucks. He may be a teacher and a mutant who bridges the gap between humanity and mutants to find some unity in between there, but he's not entirely a man of virtue. Like most characters in the X-Men fandom, he is a person with flaws and attributes, and how you view his role in the story is entirely up to you. After these 2 big babies fight it out in the Arizona desert for a little bit longer, Charles pulls out the reverse psychology card and gives it to John, who then gives into joining Charles' team. Finally. We cut to a panel with the giant-sized team assembled in their new costumes. Maybe it's tacky, maybe it's bombastic, maybe it's just designed by Mr. Fantastic. Eventually, after posing for the family portrait, we see Sunfire begin to interrogate Charles. A man in a blue rubber suit and red swimming goggles walks out. Oh, sorry. His name is Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, to fill the new team on the details of the mission at hand. There's a little bit of backstory here involving some characters you might not know, so I'll summarize it as fast as I can. The previous X-Men team consisted of Cyclops and Robert Drake, who usually just goes by Bobby, aka Iceman, Walking Ice Cube and notorious for making things suspectingly cold, Warren Worthington, aka Angel, who's just a rich dude with wings and that's all he's gonna be for a while. Alex Summers, aka Havoc. Similar to his brother, he also produces concussive blasts, just not from his eyes only. Lorna Dane, aka Polaris, the green-haired master of magnetism. Like another master of magnetism. I wonder if there's anything there. Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl. Marvel's second or most famous redhead, depending on who you ask. She's also a powerful telepath and telekinetic. These mutants showed up to the mysterious island of Krakoa after being made aware of a powerful mutant on the island. After arriving via the Stratojet, they are overwhelmed and beaten except for Cyclops. For whatever reason, this same entity that captured the rest of the team managed to affect Cyclops' beams to the point of him almost having regular eyes, unless you count those stoner eyes. He takes the Stratojet back and meets with Xavier. We see Scott explaining what happened to the rest of the team when suddenly and violently his powers come back to him. Almost immediately after hearing this, we see Sunfire decide to break his agreement to help Xavier's request of rescuing the missing mutants. Sunfire explains to Cyclops that he doesn't even like being in the company of the mutants that are currently surrounding him, so rather than wasting more time, Cyclops just signs him off, boards the Stratojet, and heads off to Krakoa. And who should show up not even 5 panels later? Sunfire. Make up your mind, Yoshida.
This is not okay. This needs to stop now.
This time, Wolverine, Banshee, Storm, Colossus, Cyclops, Thunderbird, and now Sunfire all head to Krakoa together to investigate and hopefully rescue the missing mutants. We see the mutants split up into 4 different assault teams. Cyclops and Thunderbird explore the island until they realize the Stratojet has disappeared in true Scooby-Doo fashion. Ruh-roh, Raggy! After making the mistake of turning around to look at mysteriously erecting temples. Erecting temple? Oh, yep, that's definitely erecting. They are then attacked by sentient vines. Zoink scoobs! We catch up with Storm and Colossus fighting off a rock avalanche? How, you ask? Oh, simple. Colossus picks up an absolute unit of a tree and starts going for the high score at a batting cage, and Storm uses her power of the weather to airbend the falling rocks into a nearby body of water. Following Wolverine and Banshee, we see them having to fight the most fearsome enemy in this comic thus far. Gigantic crabs.
Knife is useless against those massive claws.
And up in the sky we have Nightcrawler and Sunfire fighting off the birds as directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Eventually, after Scooby and the gang reconvenes inside of a temple, we see all of Scott's previous team members tangled up and held up by vines. After freeing them, they come to consciousness. Angel warns them the whole thing was a trap and that whatever captured them purposely let Scott free, only to bring more mutants back. At that point, the ground begins to shake and we run into a giant, menacing, and kind of adorable mastermind monster. Monster mind. And who is the monster mind behind it all? Krakoa, who is a literal sentient island. Well damn, we're gonna need some final boss battle music for this. Krakoa explains that it needed the energy of the mutants to survive, like some sort of mutant vampire. What, you think this one specific ability won't ever come up again? Think again! We then see the mutants again having their energy absorbed by Krakoa, followed by Iceman, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and Banshee trying to beat up part of Krakoa almost as hard as Street Fighter players beat up that bonus car stage in the game. With little effect coming from physical attacks, similar results come from Sunfire hurling fire at it, and Storm trying to torch it with lightning bolts. Eventually seeing the hopelessness of the situation, Xavier contacts Scott telepathically and comes up with a plan that could defeat Krakoa. Xavier engages in a telepathic fight. At the same time, Cyclops begins to enact the plan while Xavier has Krakoa distracted. What's the specific of those plans, you ask? Oh, it's pretty straightforward, you see. Storm just has to summon the greatest lightning storm anyone has ever seen, and then Polaris, yup, she's still around, to act as a literal lightning rod, who then has to use her powers of magnetism while pushing herself to death. While this whole thing is going on, Havoc, and also Polaris' partner, begins yelling at his own brother after seeing how much pain it is causing his significant other. Eventually, Xavier has to tag out after his mental strength becomes drained, and then Krakoa is free to rain havoc.
Got him!
Okay, see, that pun wasn't intentional. With one final conjoined assault by the Summers brothers, Polaris has finally been charged enough by Storm and manages to use her magnetism to reach all the way to the molten core of the Earth. This then causes Krakoa mental strain and begins to shrink. As it shrinks, the island also becomes unstable, and now it's a race for everybody left on the island to flee by combination of Iceman making an ice raft, and the Summers brothers using their powers to hydroplane away from the shifting island. Eventually, we begin to see the effects of Storm and Polaris' powers in combination. You see, Polaris' electromagnetism was temporarily severing the magnetic poles that held Krakoa to the Earth, which then caused the waters underneath the now sentient island to erupt upwards, launching the now weightless island into space. Seriously, y'all think that one scene where all the female Avengers came together in Endgame to play touch football with Spider-Man was cool? Well, two women who just met managed to launch an island into space by pushing themselves to near death, one of them becoming a living electromagnet. You guys ain't seen nothing yet. And with Krakoa hurling through space and the rest of our mutant heroes surviving a tsunami to find their stratajet, brings us to the conclusion for giant-sized X-Men. Well guys, that's the end of the explainer for this video. Stick around if you want to hear some of my opinions on the story and how it relates to future stories, as well as to find out what the future of this channel might look like. But if you were just here to listen to my incoherent ramblings of a story from the 70s and how it played out, I can only thank you for watching so far. So Giant-Sized X-Men marks the foray into how X-Men stories would go on to be told, and the characters that would mark this new era for the X-Men. Characters like Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, and Nightcrawler would eventually go on to be some of the more prominent members of the X-Men, but I felt like the story needed to be told to show how tense and dramatic arguments were for a bulk of the story, just as well as the action. Arguments that range from moral differences to vitriol between two grown men acting like children, name-calling one another. I also wanted to use this video as a chance to revisit the story for myself, because admittedly it's been roughly 3 years since I decided to get into the X-Men comics myself, and this comic is where I started my journey, working my way through almost 50 years worth of stories involving mutants and their struggle within this fictional world. As for the future of this channel, I also plan to help people understand the same half-decade worth of material involving the X-Men and other mutants. I also do highly recommend that you find a way to read this comic for yourself, even if it's just to browse through the pages to appreciate how vivid the art is. For example, how Storm is depicted as a strong female of color who's introduced as nearly naked, but somehow is still showed as a literal force of nature and one with the weather rather than a sexualized object. Truly a milestone for its time. If you wouldn't mind sharing this video with anybody else you know who are into comics, or even those who are hesitant to get into comics for its confusing nature or high bar to entry, hopefully this video being shared around makes it less intimidating to newcomers who are trying to get into comics, like the X-Men, and helps the comic community feel more inclusive. And hey, if you disagree with something I said in the video or want to point out something I did wrong in the video, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll try to be better about it next time. I do hope you'll join me again when I decide to explore another story in the realm of comics, and I hope you survived this video.